Good. So welcome everyone. The webinar today is how to manage your money during a career transition. And my guest today is Lacey Filipich, Director of Money School.
Thanks, Shireen. Hi everyone, nice to meet you. My name's Lacey Filipich. I'm a chemical engineer and I worked in mining for about 10 years across Australia and the United States. And when I was 19, I started investing in property. And I kept investing in property while I worked and then started in shares and became financially independent. And so now in my mid-30s, I don't have to work, which is wonderful. I'm really passionate about sharing the message about passive income and how to invest and about early retirement and options for lifestyle design, which is why I'm here today. So this is how I think about career transitions. And often when we first think about career transitions, we think about that bottom blue box, which is about being made redundant or getting fired. Actually, there's some thought to be given to when you are increasing your income, whether it's a planned or an unplanned change. So for example, for changing jobs where you apply for another job and you get a higher income, or perhaps you get promoted by surprise at work. Those are the green boxes up the top. And in both cases, it's really important that you think about what you're doing with the extra money that you earn. Don't just take it for granted. It's that idea of make hay while the sun shines. So if you're in that situation, I would advise that you think about saving more of that earnings that you've just increased and working out how to invest it so that you can retire early. So that's the money going up side. When your money decreases, and this is probably where most people really start thinking about it because they don't have a choice, are the orange box, which is when it's planned. So let's say you leave your job and you want to go to consult for yourself or start your own business. Or unplanned, which is the right-hand blue box, which is the one that talks about being fired or fired or made redundant, which is probably the more common time when people start thinking about that. In both of those cases, you really need a plan. And the different types of plan, when you have a situation when you know that you're going to be changing jobs and your income's going to change, then you can have a very structured plan about what you're going to do with your money. And you can have triggers in there about, okay, well, I'm going to stop spending at this point, or I'm going to look for a part-time work at some other point. When you have the blue box, which is it's a surprise, you really need to think about a rainy day plan. And in fact, everybody should have a rainy day plan. So I'll talk a little bit more about what's involved in that rainy day plan later. Now I'll hand back to Shireen to talk about some considerations, particularly for that blue box.
Whether your career transition is planned or unplanned, are considerations how long you'll be without an income. Now, the average job search for professionals is 6 to 8 weeks. And for executives, it's a bit longer at 10 to 12 weeks. However, there are a number of factors which will impact the length of your job search. For example, your profession, your qualifications and skills and experience, your demographics, so your age, your gender, your marital status, economic market conditions such as national, state or local issues around job availability, your preferences, which is your availability to start, location, flexibility, remuneration requirements, those types of things, and also your job search strategy.
Great, thanks, Shireen. So one of the things I recommend for everybody, regardless of whether you're getting promoted, you're thinking you might be made redundant, or you're planning to move into another career, is to have a buffer. And what I mean by a buffer is a savings account. Now, it could be your mortgage offset account, but the important thing is that you don't spend that money. And you have a buffer of savings so that if something happens, planned or unplanned, you can rely on that money to live. Because of course, the worst thing that can happen if you're living month to month, paycheck to paycheck, is that you get made redundant and you don't get a big payout, and then you really have to scramble to get a job. And we want to avoid that because it might mean that you choose a job that's not right for you because you feel financial pressure. The good news is you can start saving for your buffer right now. People often ask how much that should be, and it's really up to you. Anywhere between 3 to 18 months of living costs would be the recommendation. It depends on a lot of the factors that Shireen mentioned, whether you think you're going to be able to find a job more easily, what the market's like, how your job search is working. You need to account for maybe having a chunk of time where you won't have an income. So that's what that buffer is all about.
So, it's interesting because if the average job search is 6 to 8 weeks or longer for executives, up to 12 weeks, what would you say is a minimum buffer that they would need?
To be comfortable, it's really about how well you're going to sleep at night. So the answer will be different for different people, but I would say 6 to 12 months of living costs. Now, keeping in mind that your cost of living when you're not working is usually much lower than when you're working, because when you're working, you don't have much time, so you pay for a lot of things. You'll go to the most convenient supermarket, or you'll go to, get people to help you clean, that kind of thing. When you're not working, you maybe don't need that much. So you don't think of it as the living cost that you're having while you're working. It might be slightly lower. It could be a lot lower. For example, I can live off 30 grand a year pretty happily if I'm not working. So don't feel like it's got to be hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it does need to be enough to meet your minimum requirements to live and keep a roof over your head and keep your children clothed and happy. And I would say 6 months as a minimum.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so the second thing that I recommend everybody has, and again, regardless of how secure your job is and what your transition plan is have a plan for the rainy day. So if the worst happened and your boss walked into your office tomorrow and said you're fired and you didn't even get a redundancy, what would you do? But the third point as well is something to keep in mind before this transition happens, is not to take on huge amounts of debt that aren't for assets. Now, a very simple definition of an asset is it puts money in your pocket. So your car doesn't put money in your pocket, and your house that you live in generally doesn't put money in your pocket. So before leaping into big mortgages or big personal loans for things like cars, think very carefully about how you're going to afford those if the worst could happen. Now, everybody wants their own home. They want the security of that. I totally understand it. I have my own home and I have a mortgage on it. But it's about making sure that you have enough money to service those loans on top of your living costs, your basic expenses, if you have a break in your income.
Excellent. I like those top 3 strategies, Lacey. Thank you.
Yeah, great. So the rainy day plan, everybody needs to have one of these, in my opinion. It's something that you don't necessarily ever refer to. Hopefully you don't. But if something bad happens, then you know exactly what you're going to do. So it helps take the stress out of the situation. And I think that's the thing most people struggle with when they lose their job or they change or their income goes up or down, is that uncertainty. And the more you can take the stress out of it, the better, right? So think very carefully about what you do differently. What would you stop spending money on? What would you sell? For example, my husband and I, if we both were out of work, we don't really need 2 cars. We might be able to sell a car, and that money could go into our buffer fund. Have a think also about using this opportunity, and particularly when someone gets paid a redundancy, might be your only chance in life to have a really easy mini retirement. And mini retirements are small chunks of time, could be 3 to 12 months of your retirement that you normally have at the end of your working life, but you bring it forward into your youth. Now, I've done 5 of these and had 22 months off during my working life, and they've done my career and my income no harm. So I highly recommend them. And the interesting thing about them is they can be much lower cost living experiences than normal life, because you can live anywhere. Places like Argentina and Thailand are really cheap to live in. So to give you a bit of an example with that one, my husband and I have agreed that if he was made redundant, we would pack our whole house into our double lock-up garage. We would rent out the main house, and we would go and live either in Italy or in Argentina, depending on political situations, for 3 to 6 months with our kids. And we would spend less doing that than we would if we lived in Perth. So when you've worked out what you'd like, where you'd like to live and what you'd like to do and what kind of your dream is that you would do if you had 3 to 6 months off, work out how much that actually costs. Write it all down, put it in a file, whether it's on your computer or in a piece of paper, and then put it away and don't look at it. And then if the worst happens, pull it out and you'll know what you need to do.
Yeah, I like that rainy day plan. One of the things I've noticed with my career coaching clients is when I ask them how long they've been looking for a job, they'll say something like, I've been renovating my house, or I took 3 months off, or don't factor in that the job search time includes the time you're actually actively looking for a job. So if you take 3 months off, bear in mind that it's still going to be a potentially 8 to 12 weeks before you actually in another job.
Absolutely. And there's nothing to say when you think about job search. So the process, and you'll be the expert here, Shireen, the process of looking for jobs and getting in touch with people and networking, that kind of thing. That doesn't have to be done in person initially. I mean, it's great if you can have coffees with people, but you could be doing some of that towards the end of your mini retirement. So say my husband and I have been in Argentina for 6 months and we're thinking about coming home. That last month, he could be getting in touch with people and starting to look at the job market. But you're absolutely right. If he leaves it till the last minute and we get back to Perth, then yeah, he's got 3 months maybe to find his next job. So you've got to account for that.
Okay, great. So let's move on to our next slide. And this slide is by personal finances expert in the US who I've read a couple of her books, and she has some fantastic knowledge. And one of the quotes that she has is hope for the best, save for the worst. And she says to immediately cut all the expenses you can, hunker down and be very frugal with your money until you get another steady job. What are your thoughts on that quote, Lacey?
Well, I think this is very appropriate for anyone that doesn't have a savings buffer. Cut out everything you can. I think it's a great thing to stop spending money on the things that you don't need or don't give you joy as soon as you lose work. Do that earlier. Don't wait until you're onto your last $1,000 to start cutting spending. So I think her advice is really sound there. What I think some people miss is that if they have that savings buffer and they have something that they want to do at that time, and they're fairly confident that at some point they'll be able to get another job once they put in that time and effort that they need to, that rather than feeling the panic that comes about when you tell someone to be very frugal and to stop spending, that they can feel empowered by taking charge of it and actually doing the things that you mentioned with your clients, things like renovating their house or whatever it works for them, whatever they want to spend that time doing, rather than making it feel very stressful.
Yeah, look, you make a really good point there around the stress of job search and the stress of career transition. And what I have noticed is that because it is quite stressful and the uncertainty, people can cut their expenses, but we also want people to do things that they're still going to enjoy, to keep their self-esteem up, to keep their social networks up, and to get out and do fun things, because it is quite stressful searching for a job and being in that career transition space. Do you have any ideas around that, Lacey, for people to pick and choose what they're going to cut?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the word joy is the one that I think about the most. If you've got a Netflix account that's been sitting there and you haven't used it and it doesn't bring you joy, get rid of it. There are certainly lots of other things people can cut very easily just because they don't need the convenience so much when you've got more time, right? So instead of having to go to Woolies or Coles to go buy your groceries, you can get them much cheaper at the local market. You can prepare your own food and your own coffee. Definitely stop buying things like clothes and handbags and stuff like that. Unless you don't have a shirt on your back, there's no reason for you to buy new clothes unless you need them for a job interview. People get a hit, a consumer purchase hit, and then, 10 minutes later, they're miserable because they spent that money. Avoid those. Don't go into the shops. Don't go window shopping. Things I'd recommend.
Now, I have one question here that's come through. Is it better to take drastic action to cut all costs or to ease into it?
Make those decisions about what you don't need that don't give you joy in the first week or two. Do it early, because there's no point spending the money on those and then getting down to your last $1,000. Don't leave it until you're at your trigger point. That means you have to panic and go get a job at McDonald's. Early is good, but if you've got an action plan, you won't feel the need to panic over it.
Okay. And I've got another question here. How much in a dollar amount should I have in my buffer account?
It's a very good question, and it's different for everybody. So I mentioned before, I can live on $30,000 a year. Now, a lot of people go, because I have earned in the past 6 figures quite happily. I never managed to spend all that because I have very low living costs. I don't have an expensive car, and I don't drink expensive wine, and I don't go out a lot, and by personal choice, because those things don't bring me joy. So for me, $30,000 could go for a year. Now, for people with expensive tastes or high debts, $30,000 might last them 3 months. So that dollar figure varies for everybody. So you need to be really honest about how you spend your money and what your priorities would be. I personally prefer 6 figures in my buffer account. It just helps me sleep better. And that for me is the goal with my money. So it's really a personal question.
So just on that point, do you actually have a separate account that says buffer?
It's actually my offset account on my mortgage. So I do have a mortgage. Now we have quite significant savings, quite a lot of cash, partly because of what's happening in the economy at the moment. So part of the mental division of the money in that offset account is part of it is the buffer, and part of it is if we see a great investment opportunity for us to be able to jump on it. But it's all in that offset account because I get the savings on the interest.
Okay, excellent. I like that.
I guess the one thing I'll add is be careful as well a little bit with that rainy day plan. The word of caution. My rainy day plan was so good that I quit my job without another to go to. Now, that's a wonderful problem to have. And as I said, it's done me no harm financially. I earn far more now than I did when I was on a salary, that kind of thing. So It's not a bad thing, but just be warned, when you start dreaming, it can be really hard to bring it back.
I like that. So let's talk about action steps, what people can do after the webinar to go ahead and take action on these recommendations.
Okay, so the first thing I'd recommend you do is go have a look at your savings amount. Do you have a buffer account already? You could set up your own buffer account, because online accounts generally have no fees attached to them. You could set up an account. Or do you have an offset account on your mortgage? And can you mentally sequester some of that cash as your buffer and try and work out if it's big enough for you? Now, as we said, 3 to 18 months of living costs, that's about what helps you to sleep at night. Some people will be very comfortable with 3 because they'll be like, nah, I'll get a job within 4 weeks. Others will be worried and will want to have a little bit more. So work out what your number is, write down your rainy day plan, cost it out and put it in the drawer, and hopefully you don't look at it again.
And I'd add to that, just to educate yourself a little bit more on the local market conditions for your particular profession. Not only on the new ways of looking for jobs, but also the current market issues. Well, thanks very much, Lacey. And thank you to all our attendees for joining us on the webinar today. I'd like to recommend that you visit Lacey's website. There's a link there up on the screen. I'd also suggest that you sign up to her newsletter. She has a fabulous newsletter, and you can like her on Facebook. She has some interesting videos and other information she shares through her Facebook page. So thanks again, Lacey.
Thank you, Shireen. I really enjoyed it.
Excellent. Well, we'll sign off now. Thank you to everyone and have a great rest of the day.